Well, I mean, you have the spring season is what we call the first turning. That's a post-crisis era, and these usually tend to be eras in which community is valued, individualism is devalued, institutional life is very strong and compelling, and people feel like they're living in a society which is greater than the sum of its parts. Meaning, as individuals, we aren't very much, but my God, we're able to create something really great together, right? A sense which we absolutely do not have today, right? So that's the first turning mood, and these are periods in which nonconformity is shunned. I mean, people really are. These are periods of a great deal of group think. In fact, they're ridiculed for that. Not only afterwards, but even as it's happening, it's ridiculed for that. And then the first turnings are followed by the second turning, the summer, and that's the awakening. Those are the periods I talked to you before about. In American and English history, we actually give numbers to these awakenings. Certainly in American history, we talk about the First Great Awakening actually, you could even talk about the Puritan Awakening as the First Great Awakening with Jonathan Winthrop, with John Winthrop. The second with sometimes called the First Great Awakening with Jonathan Edwards in the 1740s, and then the Second Great Awakening that occurred in the late 1820s and 1830s and so on, 1890s and with the 1960s and 70s, which many historians call America's Fifth Great Awakening, right? And there you have it, right? I mean, that's when people tire of social conformity. They want to throw off social discipline. They want to find a new sense of personal authenticity. And society, right around that point, becomes more individualistic. Robert Putnam, who's probably America's most famous sociologist, wrote a probably very acclaimed book called Bowling Alone, which is on America. Americans used to go bowling in groups. We went with the Elks Club or the Kiwanis Club, and now when we go bowling, we just go bowling as individuals. We just take along a friend or something. And he said, of all of the indicators that he looks at to show this great turning away from community life to individual life, it started right around the early to mid 1960s. Right around 63, 64, 65 is when it started. And that is really when the awakening started, right? And that's how we look at that awakening. And a lot of nostalgia about what happened, before that awakening. There's a great line for American Graffiti. If you recall the movie American Graffiti, but the tagline of the movie poster was, "Where were you in 62? And 62, that was still innocence, And by the time the movie came out in 1973, well, we all knew we were no longer innocent anymore, So that became the change. And it not only was a change in the culture, hostility to cultural authority, parents, male patriarchy, I mean, everything that felt like impositions, but later on became also a rebellion against government control, tax cuts, deregulation. I mean, all sides of the political spectrum took part in this awakening. And then moving out of that awakening, you have what we call the unraveling. This is the fall season. And that's a period which is much the opposite of a high. Individualism is strong. Institutions are weak. These are, in American history, these are seasons of, these are decades of sort of cynicism and bad manners, like the 1990s, the 1920s, the 1850s, decades of weak civic authority when people just, let it all hang out in their individual lives. This has been true really for the past 30 years. You go into a bookstore and all the most upbeat, positive books are about me, myself, and I, right? I can do anything. I can conquer the world. But me as part of a group, well, it's just nothing but gloom and doom, right? The end of the family, the end of society, the end of politics, right? And then, of course, the winter season is where unravelings always end up. Should be nobody's surprise in the story, right? And these are the great crises. And this is when we see what's happening today. The divergence of the public into often two different warring partisan camps, and a growth in external dangers, which because public action and functional public action has been so debilitated and undermined by the unraveling that we can no longer really function, and we can't respond to any of these dangers or threats given the institutions we have. We have to remake all of the institutions in a period of public urgency, public mobilization, and creative destruction of civic life, right? And that's when we sort of remake the institutional life. And in some way that we sort of, nature remakes itself. That would be the natural metaphor. And I don't know, the way the archetypes line up, I think it's pretty well known. The prophet archetype is born and raised during the high, right? During the period of conformity. They come of age during the awakening. The nomad archetype, this is the Xer archetype, is raised as kids during the awakening. They come of age during the unraveling. Perfect for them. That's all the lessons they learn about life, is just take care of yourself. It's up to you. Or my favorite phrase of the 1990s, it works for me. I love that. I really don't care if it works for you. It works for me, right? Anyway, so that's Gen X. And then millennials are born and raised during the unraveling. And they're much more protectively raised, right? Because it's an individualistic era. Everyone knows it's dangerous, right, for kids. And they are raised much more specially, and they're raised much more to have sort of communal instincts and collective instincts, just as boomers during the high were raised to have individualistic instincts. And they come of age during the crisis. And finally, you have a generation raised during the crisis as children. And the last time we had one of that is we call today in America the silent generation. These are people who were born in the late 1920s, 1930s, early 1940s. We have a few of them still in public life today. Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi until recently. They are leaving. There are very few of them left now, and they have been the moderating, elder edge in a way, sort of holding America back a little bit. And they, people like Howard Baker and so many of the members of that generation who are known as the great conciliators, known for being able to bridge gaps during the 1960s and 70s and 80s. They're leaving now, and their restraining influence will no longer be present. And that adds a little bit of the edge to the later stages of the crisis.